Welcome to the Vanflip podcast. I'm lucky enough to sit down with Bobby Blitz from the American thrash groove metal band, longtime groove thrash metal band, Overkill. We are glad to have you on the podcast, Bobby. How are you doing?
Hey, great to be here, man. Starting to celebrate the spring, celebrating a new record, celebrating a new tour. I mean, things are looking up, so it's good to be promoting something that's let's say, viable in the current day.
Yeah, that's good. And for being around for so many years, it's a testament to how long you guys have been able to rise above and keep moving forward.
Bro, I do this thing on stage every now and then where I come out like this. I come out and I go, bare knuckles. When's the last time Grandpa kicked your fucking ass?
Yeah. Not saying that you're a grandpa or anything like that personally, but, you guys have managed to... you started in the 80s, I think 1980, if I'm not mistaken, but you've been kicking it since then and, just being a purveyor of thrash metal music and setting or pushing the bounds and pushing the limits of that. So congratulations on all that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, it's quite an accomplishment. I never thought that, the journey was going to be this long, but I suppose part of that is that I enjoyed the journey. So you kind of, it's one piece after another or one step after another that takes you down this road where all of a sudden it's almost 40 fucking years and you say to yourself, this is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
But it was because of enjoying the, those individual segments of the journey all the way through and all the stories that you have and all, listen, I've been working in motorcycle boots and Levi's for, since 1985. So that's a good thing. So.
Yeah. No corporate attire for you.
I own a suit, but it's for bad occasions.
It's for the award shows too. You got to go to the Grammys or the award shows over the years.
Voted by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well, yeah. So right.
Who's this douchebag?
Right before we hopped on the podcast, you were going to let me know about the vases behind your head. So if you're watching on the video, there's two vases on either side of Bobby.
I got them in Canada. When I was on the road, let's make it real.
I was grabbing them off the mantelpiece here.
They're called lava vase. You can hear it. You can kind of see it there.
Oh, yeah.
It's called lava vase. But it's made from the rubble. The original ones were made from the rubble of the Second World War in Germany. It was part of the Marshall Plan to clean up, the destroyed cities.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody came up with this idea of melting down the rubble, and they found old Luftwaffe bomb molds that were still
Yikes, yeah.
functioning, and they made vases out of it. So this one is actually not just post World War II dated. It's more from the '60s. It's got kind of a psychedelic vibe to it. But it carried on from that. But that's one of the things that we're talking about, the journey that I collected along the way. It's not like I'm a huge art collector, but when I see something where I'm like, wow, that's weird, I pick that up.
What are some other things in your collection that you've gotten along the travels, along the many, many years that you guys have been touring?
Well, I mean, obviously, the simplicity stuff, T-shirts from other bands.
Right.
Our own T-shirts. I have a couple of art pictures around. I mean, I got something from a guy who does metal art. There's the Elegant Lady on my mantelpiece. That's the Day of the Dead from Mexico.
Nice.
But it's done in clay. It's not done in the paper mache. So, I mean, I don't have like a ton of stuff, but the stuff I have is kind of really important to me because there's a memory attached to it. Like these vases were from Canada from a show up in Toronto that we did. The Elegant Lady is from Monterrey, Mexico. So, I mean, they're attached to those memories that we were talking about earlier, or that journey.
Mm-hmm.
That when I look at that, I don't just see the Elegant Lady. I see, Monterrey, Mexico. I was down there for a couple of extra days. I met some friends. Just a good time.
Yeah. What is your favorite? I mean, you probably can't even think about it or recall it because there's been so many tours, but do you have a favorite tour over the years that you kind of look back fondly on, or they just all kind of blend together at this point?
No, there's one. I mean, you don't get into this kind of music unless you're a fan of this kind of music, and obviously the band is named Overkill. So, I mean, you could connect us somewhere in there to Motorhead. We weren't that original band that came out and was like all of a sudden we were struck by lightning and we were writing stuff that was going to be the next scene. We were a cover band, and we were playing Motorhead, and we were playing some heavy metal. And in 1988, we did a tour where we opened, and then Motorhead was second, and then Slayer closed, which was just a great three-prong attack. But years later, and Motorhead always, I'm not going to say kept in touch with us, but were always cordial to us wherever we ran into them out in the road. And these guys were idols of mine, I mean, when I was a kid. I mean, and sometimes you don't want to meet your idols because you're like, geez, I'm going to meet this fucking guy. I'm going to come home if he's an asshole. I'm going to break all the fucking records today.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that.
But you know what I'm saying, right? I mean, it's just, but that wasn't the truth with them. The truth was that they were 10 times cooler than I even thought they could have. So they get to us, and we get a tour back in the somewhere around 2007. And so it's through Germany. It's Motorhead, and we're direct support to them at this point. Well, in any case, it's the last show in Berlin, and I get this message from Big E, our light, comes into the dressing room. It's like, Bobby Lemmy wants to go talk to you. And so I go down to his dressing room, and he gives me a drink, and we're talking. He goes, I want you to sing Overkill with me tonight. And I was like, how fucking great is this? This is going to be one of the memories of a lifetime. Yeah. I know this is old, but the point is that I'm afraid I'm going to mess up, because it's a duet, I'm going to mess up the lyrics. So I write, each on my forearm, I got the first word of each verse like this. And he's going to me, he goes, we got to sing it the same mic. I'm like, okay. So as I'm singing, I'm glancing down to the first word so I don't fuck it up.
Right.
And he fucking calls me out for cheat notes in front of 12,000 in Berlin. He's got cheat notes. So that was quite a memory.
Yeah, that's a lot of anxiety at one point there, just at one time coming flooding in. How is it like? Because I mean, you again for having such a long career and interacting with so many, I guess, if you want to call them legends, whether it's in thrash or metal in general. Because you just talked about, sharing the stage with Lemmy, playing with Motorhead, and also in the same show playing with Slayer. I mean, what's it been like to just share the stages with so many? Like, at the time it may not have been huge, but now obviously, as we've progressed and as bands have gone on, and some people have obviously passed away, like Lemmy and other acts that or other people that you've probably shared the stage with. But like, looking back on it, do you ever think like, wow, I'm fucking beyond lucky to have been at the right spot at the right time in your career, starting Overkill and within that genre of thrash? Like, do you ever just think back and it's like, wow, I'm fucking lucky for all that?
I mean, that's a great take on it. I mean, of course I do, but I think that, as time passes, it obviously becomes even more exaggerated in my head. But and that's just being honest.
No, of course.
I mean, but when it was happening, it was huge too. But I can tell you, there was always one thing, and I attribute this to any success that this band has had over the years, is that there's the intimidation factor should never ever be there. Like, if you're a young band, I mean, just remember this: if you're playing with somebody that you think is just the fucking shit, it doesn't matter if your stage time is 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever your stage time is, that's your stage. It doesn't matter who precedes you or who follows you, and how much you want to go have a couple beers with them there. And that you can attribute to one of the 6 degrees of longevity, to be able to say, hey, at this time, this is mine. I don't give a fuck who you. You want to watch it? That's fine, because I'm going to show you how it's done. And I think if you have that attitude, I mean, you have to have a certain amount of ego to be able to present this to people. I mean, or you can feed yourself to the sharks. One or the other. So I think that's one of the most important things I took out of all of that meeting people that I admired over the years, that it was still my stage, our stage at this time. So just, I think, some good advice to give to the youngsters.
How, was that a mindset from the get-go, or is that something you kind of learned after maybe a year or a few years, like sharing the stage with a lot bigger acts, that not that the allure has worn off from sharing the stages with these guys, but that you kind of realize in your head, I can't let that get to me. I have to, or like we as a band have to, set ourselves apart from all these acts and all these other bigger names. Is that something that you just over time, you guys as a band or you personally just kind of like had that mindset set in, or is that from the get-go? You guys were coming out fucking shit up.
No, I think it's learned. I think you're 100% right. I think it's learned. I don't think anybody can have that mindset, but I think it reveals itself, very soon on. I did this. We had a really nice bunch of kids from Ireland, a band called Gamma Bomb, and we've got this kind of punky vibe, and we did a European tour with them, and I got along famously with the singer. He just liked the fact that I was an Irish American, and I liked the fact that he was a prick. Yeah. But we got along famously, and he was admiring how I presented the stuff one night, and you come off the stage, you're sweaty, it's kind of like you come off, it's your shirt's off, it's like beat that, that's the attitude. He goes, how do you do that? And I said, bro, you steal the good stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't create any of this shit. All I did was pay attention.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to our stage for 45 minutes or whatever that time amount is, it's from observing and saying, look what they do. They own that fucking stage at this particular time. And I think all we did was adopt that and incorporate it into our own principles.
That's interesting. That's a good motto to have. Also, probably good information to share down to the younger bands coming up, because again, you could get starstruck or, starstruck as you call it. But, it is for the younger guys out there. There's a lot going on, especially with social media and everything like that. A lot of people are conscious of what they're doing, whether it's in real life, on stage, in their music. So it's probably good advice to just say, screw it and just kind of be the wildest, best version of yourself/band you can be.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I mean, it's a different era too, when I started learning any of the principles that I carry to this day, obviously I've had to reinvent myself as technology has changed. I don't want to call myself an absolute, dolts when it comes to social media, but I don't like the shit. Right. I don't need that shit in my life. I need it in my professional life because I need to promote the band that I love so much. But I don't need to know who's taking a shit or who has a fucking stomach virus or any of that other crap.
I get that.
I'm fine, kind of where I am. But my point is that the difference between, the modern day musical warrior who came from social media, the 18 to 25-year-old or 30-year-old, and the old guy, is that I have both. And my social media was much different. It was, you had to go face to face with somebody. You had to shake their hand. You had to promote your band. Your social media was being at the club in Brooklyn on Friday and Saturday, having an open bar tab you were never going to fucking pay.
Yeah.
But drinking with Pete Steele from fucking Carnivore and later Typo Negative. So the point is that that's how we made our bones. Was, sure, some people didn't like it, but you still had to face them. And I think that was, the wealth of self-confidence that comes from that. Because I don't think anybody has that self-confidence when they start, but it's acquired over time. And I think it's one of the things that's missing from the current day. And that makes me sound like Grandpa. I know I went to school uphill both ways.
Both ways, yeah.
All the way back, the whole fucking thing. But the point is that we had to do it. We had to. There was no, besides, God, all the girls you need.
Right.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. I feel like there was a lot of girls back in the the 80s because I always look back and because we cover hardcore and metal and everything kind of in between, and I always ask myself, like, how can we make hardcore more accessible to everybody, and how can we grow it and make it bigger? And I have these discussions internally or with people that I meet, like the differences between hardcore and metal. And I guess for the longest time, I just kind of didn't really think about it this way, but the 80s were so big for metal, huge for metal. And you know, I guess because I was a younger guy, you know, I was born in the early 80s, 83. So, you know, you guys were already a band by the time I was I was born, and you were already doing thrash metal at that time. So, you know, from my birth, metal's been already a thing. And it's just one of those things where, like, I kind of didn't really remember or realize that it was so huge, you know, like it was hair metal was even a thing. Like that was a big quote unquote pop thing too. Like hair metal became big, Twisted Sister and bands like that. It was all over like MTV at the time and this, that, or the other. And so I always am astounded that metal was so big back in the day. And then, you know, it's not as, I mean, it is big now, but it's not as like mainstream big, or at least I should say like the more underground band, like the right underneath the mainstream level. You know, like obviously you still have huge bands like Metallica, and even Slipknot is up there now too. So there are bigger metal bands out there that fall under the umbrella, but it was also crazy how big it was back then. And, you know, you guys were in the mix of all of that.
You know, you bring up a great point, and it hasn't gotten any smaller, hasn't gotten any smaller because of the social media. So there is the positiveness of the change. Obviously, I'm not just living in the past. You know, and you see some of those bands. I do an interview. Nobody understands me. Nobody understands my brilliance. I've been brilliant for 4 fucking decades. Why doesn't anybody understand? Because you've been saying you've been fucking brilliant for 4 fucking decades, and nobody wants to take your fucking bullshit. It's really what the thing is. But if you go back to, like, right after you were born, like in a 10-year period after that, one of the great things that started happening in New York, and it was a fucking weird experiment at first, because, like, there was a club called L'Amour, 1,700 people, right? And sometimes we could put 1,700 people in that club, and sometimes we couldn't. And that's just the way it was. So they started taking the thrash bands and sistering them up with the hardcore bands. So it was totally not uncommon to see Overkill Agnostic, Overkill Grunge, Overkill Leeway, you know, Overkill Madball. You know, this was like the normal thing back then. Now, obviously, there were some growing pains.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the crowds obviously probably didn't get along as well. Yeah,
but I think, you know, when the second wave of that hardcore kind of thing came along, you know, and I was friends with Bobby Hamble, and I was friends with Danny and Evan and, you know, and Billy and the guys in LOA, you know, and it was like, I mean, I remember Evan saying to me, "Where are you playing tomorrow?" You know, we just done a show at the Moors. So there was the hardcore crowd and the fucking metal crowd. We're in Philly. Oh, you're at the Trocadero. Wow, that's great. I said, I'll tell you what, you show up at 5, make sure you get on that fucking stage. So the point is that we all kind of understood the value of how it morphed into something. That the hardcore guys were way closer to the thrash guys than the thrash guys imagined, and the thrash guys were way closer to the hardcore guys than they imagined. And it actually became almost a third morphed scene. So it was really unique. I mean, you were probably 7 at the time.
Yeah, I was not even into the, you know, heavy music or hardcore for sure by then. And, you know,
to this day, I still have great relationships with these guys. I see Hamble every time I'm in fucking Florida. The guy's sitting on my bus. Nice. You know, so I mean, it's, you know, I mean, it was a unique time that spawned, let's say, a third scene from the mixing of two.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, I don't know why I wouldn't imagine that you cross paths with these guys, because obviously you're playing the same venues around the same time that all this stuff is actually on the, you know, in the beginning infant stages. You're all playing the same venues in New York and all the surrounding areas where all this quote unquote culture is starting, you know, and it's crazy to see where it's come now, because now we have, you know, genres that incorporate not only thrash and hardcore but together, but they also incorporate little other bits where, you know, we have like crossover thrash and crossover hardcore and stuff like that. What do you feel like? I mean, because obviously you're a big part of the thrash movement back in the day. What is that like when you see thrash just creep into these other genres, not just hardcore, but other, you know, it's influenced so much at this particular point? Does that make you, you know, look back fondly on like the work that you put in, or do you hate it, like, get off my lawn?
No, not get off my lawn. I mean, I take it as a compliment. I think as a death metal guy, I would take it as a compliment that it comes into the thrash bands. You know, we did a song on the new record, and we're not really what you call a progressive thrash band. You know, so that's more technical. We've had a template that we've used, but we have a whole bunch of different influences. I mean, we go all the way back to hard rock, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a fucking song on this record called Wicked Place it's a big fat groove ride. It's like Foghat on steroids and meth. You know what I mean? It's just got a great feel to it, but it comes from another era. It comes from the past somewhere. But there's a song called Twist of the Wick, which is it's just an old biker expression. It's just, here's the wick, you know.
Yeah. The handlebar.
What's that wick? So, but it lends itself to, you know, in some of the rhythms and beats to blast beats on the drums, which you could, you know, attribute to bands like Malevolent Creation out of Florida, or the Obituary Guys, or Cannibal. You know what I'm saying? Where and you think to yourself, isn't it funny how it kind of all morphs together? And it goes back to that Irish band I told you. I said, just steal the good stuff, bro. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of, I think it's a compliment or a homage to the value, for instance, of death metal or hardcore, if that's what a thrash band was using, and vice versa to, let's say, Obituary using an absolute thrash riff.
Yeah, actually, we just had Obituary last week on the podcast, so that was interesting. Obviously, me being in Florida, I'm more aware of like the death metal scene that, you know, popped up down here with Death, and, you know, like you were saying, Deicide, or you didn't see Deicide, but, you know, Deicide, Cannibal, and all those other bands. So yeah, that was pretty fun to have them on the podcast and chat. Before we get too far away from social media, I want to kind of like ask you a question, because you guys are you've been around for a longer period of time. Your audience has also been around. Well, some of your audience has been around for a longer period of time. You've obviously picked up new fans and a bigger fan base as you've gone on. But do you find that like using social media like Facebook, do you find like a lot of your audience on there is of the same demographic age-wise as you guys, or do you guys find that social media lends itself to finding a new or younger, you know, reinvigorated audience?
Well, it's a combination. I mean, the youth brings in the energy, you know, and I've always been the first one to say I can't understand why a fucking guy my age is still playing around in something that, you know, was based on young man's angst. You know, are you still angry at 64? Get the fuck off my lawn.
Yeah.
You know, it's not exactly the same. But experience obviously speaks for something here, and experience in songwriting, and probably a purity of commitment to what it was then, still trying to push the parameters, like, for instance, on the record Scorched, to make it better, to push it outward, to show all the influences on it. And I think that's what attracts that youth and keeps the, you know, the older, you know, more my age group guys and girls interested in it. You know, that it's their thing, which to me shows a fucking lot of value. Yeah. You know, I mean, if it can't be disposable, like hardcore is not a disposable genre. Thrash metal is not a disposable genre. They can't just throw it away. You know, you mentioned hair metal, and hair metal's finally kind of coming back, but that hair is all gray. You know, and it's you know, well, you follow me, right? I mean, it's not a bad thing. Some great hits, but I think the point is that when it gets passed on from generation to generation, that value only increases. And I remember I was in Germany. I was coming across a field. It was all muddy. It was a festival called Vanflip. It's in Balling, Germany. It holds about 20,000 people. Just a fucking great festival. And I was going to see the fan club, or actually, am I getting stuff right here? There you go.
Oh yeah, Skull Crushers.
I was going to see the fan club and check on some T-shirts, a deal I was doing with this dude, right? And I walk across, and there's just like 3 generations standing there. So there's grandpa, there's the father and the mother, and there's the little girl. Okay, and the little girl's about 6. And I was married to a Dutch woman at the time. and she says to me in perfect Dutch, "You're my favorite singer." You know what I mean? And I answer her back in Dutch. Okay? Now the chick is fucking, the 6-year-old is like, she doesn't even know what to do. That this American guy has actually talked to her in her own native tongue. And now the grandfather's handing me the kid, and I'm like holding it like this. We're taking pictures. The impact of that particular moment, I'm sure, is lifelong. the lasting of it.
Yeah.
And that's because the value and the principles of the band that the grandfather passed to the son who passed to his daughter. And I think that that's where that youth invigorates, obviously not 6-year-olds, but the youth of the metal youth invigorate, let's say, our fan base with let's say, fresh energy.
Yeah. And I mean that, whatever the formula is that you guys are using obviously clearly works, as you've been able to, stretch a career out over 40 years. So, kudos to that. Hat tips to you all for being able to, because a lot of bands, only wish they could even have half of that, even like 1/4 of that kind of career. So, that's a testament.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of like nuclear cockroaches, you know what I'm saying?
yeah, that's true.
Get rid of them. They drop the bomb, and then like a half hour later, they all come crawling out.
God, I thought I got rid of those guys. Now they're still pumping out albums. Yeah. Speaking of which, you guys pump out albums. I mean, that's something that you guys, are very good at. For being around 40-ish years, you guys have almost released an album every 2 years, give or take a year or two. Because this is Scorched, which, is coming out in next month and 3 weeks from today. Obviously, maybe by the time this podcast is out, it's already out. But April 14th, right, I believe?
It's the 14th, 14th of April. We start the European tour on the 13th. Now, obviously, there'll be some singles out prior to that, and they'll be contained in the set. There'll be a production video for the title track, a song "Wicked Place," the song "The Surgeon." Kind of weird. I remember doing this record, and you're saying like every 2 years, and that's true. And this was the longest removed time. This was actually 4 years between records.
We had COVID and everything too, but
19.
Yeah.
So now, April 23. But it was, I think the record shows that benefit or that luxury of time. And I say that because it was written under the shittiest of circumstances. And there's something about shitty circumstances that make thrash records great. And it's not because you want to embrace the shittiness of it or that particular time. You want to push back against the shittiness. There's something about this that is like, I'm not trying to quote a great hair rocker, we're not going to take it.
Right.
Yeah. And the point is that is that could be a thrash moniker. That kind of a statement that you push back against things. It's not about negative energy necessarily. It's about positive energy. And I remember writing this record, or my part of it, during Peter Pandemic and all of his fucking heroes there that were, had us all locked up and locked down and fucking sideways and fucking,
yeah.
And I was like, I found myself fucking calling the liquor store ordering 3 cases of beer at a time because I was afraid the fucking New Jersey governor would close the fucking place. Now what the fuck am I going to do?
Yeah, right?
But I mean, I was like sick thinking, Well, in any case, I started pushing back against the pushback. And I think that is the results of this record. If you have a song like The Surgeon, it's not about being told what to do. It's about bloodletting, and it's about pushing back against, the ridiculousness sometimes of what the authority says. And if you could say that at my fucking age and be able to recognize it, there's something special in this shit. To be able to say, okay, it took 4 years to do this record. But it took 4 years to get this record right, as opposed to submitting to that shitty time that it was written in.
Yeah, interesting. Did you, I don't really want to dive into COVID time because I've obviously spent a long period of time during that time talking about it with bands, but it sounds like you weren't super excited to be maybe in New Jersey locked down all the time. Because here, I experienced it a different scenario in general because I lived in Florida, so we were pretty much open after like the first 3-4 weeks, but and it was just a life as somewhat normal. But it sounds like a lot of that angst and a lot of that aggressiveness helped out because, like you were saying, like it's hard to be at your age to be that guy that's always angsty and have that younger man's angst. So maybe it was a benefit.
Well, it was a benefit with regard to writing because it was a place to go that was normal in an abnormal type time. It was the thing I've known since those years that we've been talking about since the 80s that I could go to that demo. We were shut down March 12th, 2020 in Charlotte, North Carolina. That was the last show, and we were on our way back to Jersey. And then we got to Jersey, and then after fucking 3 months of this fucking bullshit, you get like the governor on, the governor's piling bodies up in the fucking in the fucking old age homes and stuff, and he's speaking in terms of we. And I finally got to the point where I'm going, who the fuck is we? I'm not part of we.
Yeah.
We don't think this way. So I think somewhere in there, maybe the old rebel exists under the gray roof,
Yeah.
I mean, and I think somewhere in there comes the validity of a record like Scorched. Not to say, hey, you're an idiot, and this is a conspiracy theory and all this and that, but it was for sure a controlled situation. And we in Jersey were admiring Florida, saying, because I'm calling the liquor store saying, are you shutting down? Can you give me 3 cases of Heineken? What am I going to do during May?
Yeah.
Which is no way to fucking live, and I mean, I feel for people. I know there was loss, and I know there was hardship during it. I for sure know there was. But I think I think that we're a smart enough race of people, the human race I'm speaking of, to not put ourselves in dire straits, or without the help of our totalitarian government during that particular time in our lives.
It kind of felt like that for the most part.
That's kind of the way I feel about it.
No, I get it. We don't have to harp on the the topic of that time, because obviously it's probably been documented very extensively throughout, not just in the metal world, but all over. So let's.
Well, I got the results out of it. That's all I could say, and those results are in Scorched. But that's personal, not the entire view of the world.
Yeah. And touching back on the new record and the records previous to that, like you were saying, was it harder in the albums prior, leading up to it, to find like aggressive inspiration, or is it easy for you just to look at common day, everyday stuff and find something that you're like, that you don't agree with? Obviously it's easy, but like to find inspiration through that stuff.
Like I think the prior record worked out for us because we had a new member. Jason Bittner's first record with us was in 2019, and I mean the guy's a machine. I mean he's Mr. Drum. So he thinks drums, he eats drums, he lives drums. He sleeps drums. His girlfriend's a drum. You know what I'm saying? The whole thing. I'm joking, obviously. He's got a lovely wife, but but he's a machine, and he's a clock, and he's so dependable. And it was one of those situations where we were all excited over the fact that we had this new tool. So I don't think it was that hard to find inspiration for that record. And I think the record actually turned out really well. I think this one's better. I think this one's a step away from that one. But I think that, if we're opportunists, if we've done this for as long as we've done it, we search opportunity. That opportunity was Jason and a new record. If we can take that opportunity and make the most out of it, we're probably going to secure good results or something that we're satisfied. So when I look at inspiration for the last record, I didn't think it was that hard. But this one was harder because of the circumstances. But that was turned around and became absolutely inspiring with regard to what the results are.
Yeah, do you think Scorched, in your personal opinion, where would you rank Scorched with? And I know this is a hard question because you have such a long discography, not only of full length, but everything else. If you want to count everything else in the mix, but is Scorched, like, in your opinion, the most aggressive? Maybe your favorite? Like, where do you rank that in the whole long list of output from the band?
I'm going right to smartassery. It's the best thing since canned beer, and you heard it here first.
Yeah, no, I get it. You gotta sell it. So I understand.
I never rate the new record. I just can't do it. I don't think it's fair. It's going to take a year for me to figure out where it fits. I think that's the only fair way to do it. I've been doing that since the beginning. It's just like, hey, is this new record the best you ever did? I'm like, listen, I'm not one of those douchebags. I'm the same asshole I was when I did the first record, so don't think I'm any smarter just because it's 20 records.
Yeah.
I just have more experience, so I won't rate it. But I do think the Wings of War is probably, and that's the last record. I think that's, if we've done 20 records, it's got to be somewhere around number 11 or number 12. which is a good shot for it. Does this one have a chance of beating that? I think it has a chance, but I'll have to tell you in a year.
Yeah, all right, I get that. Maybe we'll touch base in a year and we'll find that answer out. You mentioned a template earlier. What without selling the secret sauce for what Overkill uses to maintain its trajectory and dominance, what could you explain what that template is in some form for maybe like younger bands or bands that are established that maybe want to adapt to that?
Well, obviously there's a formula, and that formula is performance, songwriting / performance. I think if you had to simplify it, it's action versus reaction. If you create an action, you create energy. What is the reaction to what you've just created, and how does it make you feel? And I think that's where I know that template's correct with what my part of the writing, whether that be the melody, whether that be the lyrical content, whether that be the hook in the chorus. I always think of it as action versus reaction. Now, the template that we started, let's say back in the 80s, we've constantly tried to move those parameters outwards, to try to go parallel, to try to do tangents, to go perpendicular, to try to raise the bar for ourselves. So even though the template started, decades ago, the template itself has changed over the years. And I think that's necessary because it becomes a reinvention of what was its beginnings or its origins. So it holds some of that truth of origin to it, but has gone other places over all these years. So you can't just stop progressing. You have to be able to progress. You can't just constantly rewrite the same song, build, brick houses are so strong because they're exactly the fucking same. You can stack them, but it's not that fucking interesting, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a brick fucking house. So you have to be able to think out of the box with that template. I think that's more our approach than repetition. Interesting.
Yeah, that's good. That's good information. Do you, obviously you guys tour often, and you, again, I keep harping on it, but you guys obviously you guys are probably one of the longest running bands that we've had on the podcast. So I have a lot of, longevity type questions. So I apologize, but do you and Dee Dee ever just sit on the bus or in the studio or whenever you're hanging out and just kind of have these moments where you look at each other and just go what the fuck, man?
How could you say that? I'm sitting right here.
No, I just, what I mean? How do you just, because obviously when you started, I don't know what your goal was when you started the band in 1980. Was it just for funds, or did you have an idea where you're fuck it, we're going to actually be a signed band, we're going to do this full time? But obviously back in the day, you couldn't fathom that, 40 something years later, you're still doing it. So there's got to be times and there's got to be moments where, whether it's after a show, after a release, or after these monumental, moments in a band's history where Dee Dee's the only one that's kind of shared that time with you for the entire time. So
yeah, same right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you gotta, I would assume every now and then you gotta look at each other and just be like, holy shit, man. What do we do? What do we get into?
What do you do? You out of your fucking mind. I think that we've made it interesting for ourselves. I think you could find this answer in a lot of the shit I said prior. I think it is about reinvention over the course of years. If you can enjoy the journey, if you don't think that there's a pot of gold at the end of your fucking journey, you're enjoying the journey. Mm-hmm. Each step becomes a jewel that you collect. But I think that what we did that actually made it work for us was that the harder it got, the more we dug in first. Because I just think that that's a tenacity. But we paid attention from early on. We've been involved in our own production since the first records. When we wanted co-production credits on our first release, that it was co-produced by Overkill. And that's been the way it always has been. And then we had these great managers step in. The club I mentioned earlier, where I was drinking with Pete Steele, L'Amour. These guys, these two brothers managed us with a guy who went on to Sony and did some great things with Whitney Houston after. Mm-hmm. Three dudes managed us. They took White Lion to fucking platinum status. We paid attention to every fucking thing these guys did. When we had questions, they would answer them, and they'd answer them honestly. they put us on salaries when we shouldn't have been on salaries, just so that we could continue doing this because they believed in us. In any case, when the dark days of the 90s came, we were ready to manage ourselves. So there becomes the morph into a whole second parallel to what we were doing. We were now the guys who ran the fucking business. We weren't these like creative minds. We were more like craftsmen. We weren't artists. And now we're managing the fucking band. We're making all the decisions. So when you look at this band now, this many years later, all the work is done from this room and Dee Dee's room and my office, and every T-shirt goes across my desk, and every crew guy goes across, and the salaries are done here, and blah, 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 all that shit. So all the work is done prior. Then we go out the fucking road. It's fucking middle-aged boys club, man. I mean, there's dice being thrown. Somebody's got cigars. Somebody's brought fucking 12-year-old bourbon. It's going to be a fucking good time.
Yeah.
So you can't, like, look at it. We're never out there for 6 weeks at a time anymore. So if we're out there for 3 weeks, it can be like a vacation. So I don't think we've ever looked at each other like, oh, what are we doing? This is ridiculous. That said, if you get sick, fuck it. You just want to be home in your own bed.
And
It's been a good run.
And I wasn't prefacing the question like that. I should probably clarify. It was more of like an astounding, like, what the hell, man? Because it's like you said, it's been a long ride, and it's just, I'm assuming sometimes you just got to have like, you look over and you're just like, wow, man, like, who would have thought,
Hey, who are you?
Yeah. I want to touch base, and you don't have to, go super deep into it, but it's something you brought up. You were saying that the record label puts you guys on salary. I just don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit or whatnot. Like, obviously, it was enough, or it allotted you guys to do more music rather than worry about how to pay bills. So, Well,
it wasn't a record label. It was our management.
All right, sorry.
So, I mean, they made sure that they pooled whatever they got, and instead of us getting these huge chunks of it, I mean, we knew what was going on with it, but we could take like a monthly salary back then. I mean, we were a band on our second record, and they were making sure that we were getting paid.
Okay.
That they believed in us enough to make sure that even if we had run out of the money that we had taken with regard to advance, that they would advance on the next advance so that we could pay those bills back from the early days. And that's priceless, because sure, I mean, I had to work a job here and there. I mean, I put in ceiling fans, I painted houses, the whole thing. But it didn't have to do it all the time, and I could leave that job to go on the road, because I had that other money that I could depend on to pay my rent or my car insurance or whatever.
Interesting. And you brought up another thing within that little segment about the 90s and the dark days. Was that because of the grunge movement and the alternative movement kind of taking such a stranglehold in like the radio airwaves and MTV and stuff?
Yeah, I think there was a new wave of youth. They smelled like Teen Spirit. I mean, it's just the way it was. I mean, and you have. You got to tip your hat to them. I mean, they changed the world. I mean, without a doubt. It was the antithesis. If we were the antithesis of hair metal, that whole scene was the antithesis of us. I mean, there always seemed to be a huge amount of positive aggression in thrash to me, and it didn't seem like that. That next wave carried that. It carried a great musicality to it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Big Soundgarden fan. I fucking love that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't like all of the shit that whole scene did, but some of the bands are just amazing. But I think that, it forced the thrash scene back to the underground. I mean, we were being distributed by Atlantic Records at that point.
Yeah.
And actually on them for a few records. And that's like the worldwide musical promotion machine of excess. You know what I mean? Somebody asked me, how were the cocaine days? I said, I really didn't get to experience it, any of that. But you knew it was there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You got guys, you're meeting guys with pinky rings.
Yeah. Long fingernails,
But but I think that if it forced us back to the underground, it forced bands like us, especially at the lower level bands, not the bigger tier, we're obviously a second tier, forced us back into purity, and I think that in those dark days, a lot of people didn't pay attention to shit like management. we cut our expenses by 20% right there, which is right off the top from our management, saying we're going to do it from now on. And we're going to figure this out. So I'm always proud of the fact that when it was hardest to do, we were prepared to give it a run, to give it a shot. We found deals. We found record companies that would invest in the value that we thought we had in ourselves, that they thought that we had in ourselves, that could give us great fucking advances to make great fucking records and tour the world still. So, we didn't go home and live in our parents' basements and wonder why nobody appreciated our fucking genius, and we just kept going. And I always think of it as like, what's the measure of the man, when it's easy or when it's hard, So I always think of that as something as a defining moment for Dee Dee and myself and the band.
Interesting. And, and again, this could be something that's just learned over the years, but you guys sound like or at least you, Bobby, sound like you're very humble about it. Is that something that you've always been? Like you're just a humble kind of guy, or have you been humbled over the years because, you've had such not an up and down, but just a long career? So you've seen a lot.
I'm second generation Irish Catholic.
Yeah.
I had great uncles. You know what they told me? Work fucking hard. You keep your fucking mouth shut.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't let them know all your secrets.
Yeah. That's true. I'm not Irish Catholic, but I grew up French Catholic.
I think it's upbringing. I can tell you. Dee Dee and I met Dee Dee in 80. I met his wife the next day, who was his girlfriend, who he's still married to.
Congratulations.
Which speaks volumes for commitment. And I'm not saying, hey, they should get accolades for it. I mean, it worked out because they're those kind of people. And it works out for the band because we're those kind of people. This is the way. And his wife has done some great things. And, I'm still great friends with both of them, And we were talking one day. She would come on the road and we were talking. She goes, the way it works with you two is you have exactly the same backgrounds. He has the second generation Italian. You have the second generation Irish. And you got big families, and you always put the families before anything else. So when that is all taken care of, the band takes care of itself. It's not about, if I don't get this, the world's going to end. Yeah. You got to make sure people are okay, So I think that with that being said, it's become the foundation for why that longevity happens, I mean, I've gone through a couple of divorces. I'm not the fucking poster child for commitment. But when it comes to the fucking band, I for sure am that poster child. And that is, I think, because, as she said, my upbringing.
Interesting. Yeah, that's cool. What's changed the most, in, I guess, thrash over the years?
Which is, I don't know. I mean, it's, it's funny because, we talked just a minute about those dark days, but when it started becoming healthy again, first decade of 2000, or toward the end of that, let's say 7, 8, 9, you could just see it was becoming healthy. It was getting an influx of youth. And the youthful bands that showed up during that era were playing the template that was created by bands in the thrash era in the 80s. The Metallicas, the Anthraxes, the Megadeths, Slayer, I'm not saying they were copies, but they were that template, Overkill templates, And I was a little surprised that it was going to be a repeat. I thought it was going to be they were going to take it to a different level. And I think it took them a little bit of time, but I think it did happen. That they did start taking it to a different level. They started adding, progressive influences to it. Started taking it to a more complex type of a presentation and writing. But when it first came back, I didn't think it was a hell of a lot different than what I had experienced only 15 years, 20 years before that.
Do you feel like with the ease of access, like streaming services and just the internet in general, with people being able to share their interest and their stuff that they like in an easier fashion, do you feel like there will be more dark days going forward, or do you think that because it's so accessible and because there's easy ways to share things that things may pop up that become popular, whether it's in the mainstream or not, that still, like, these audiences will always kind of have this little environment where they can just kind of, come together on, or they'll always be able to reference that, or they'll always be able to listen to you on XXX platform or something like that. No matter what, like K-pop becomes the new biggest thing in America. It doesn't matter, because these little genres still have these little audiences that are just kind of like hell-bent on listening to it.
I don't know if Overkill would exist if we were 25 years after that, or 20 or 15. If we were in the first phase and wave of technology, was a great promotional tool. And then all of a sudden the downloads started happening, and then the file sharing started happening. It became a different world. I think Overkill exists because we came from those days of excess in the 80s, or at least the end of that. So we had that promotion platform to stand on prior to all these changes. I think it's very hard for a younger band right now I'm not to say to be talented, but to be able to get the recognition that they deserve based on what they've put into it, because of how crowded the field is.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make a great record in your basement, in your bathroom, in the living room, as long as you have the technology to do so, and you can put it out amongst all the other ones, and we're not talking hundreds, we're talking thousands, maybe thousands of songs, maybe 50,000 songs. Whereas back then, I'm not going to say it was a beatdown, but it was like you beat down the other bands. You wanted to beat them. This is my fucking stage. This is my promotional moment. This is my fucking tour. Maybe a little bit greedy and selfish, but for the point of, self-advancement for something you love. I think it's really hard to see that in the current day. I mean, I applaud them. For trying, and there's some great shit out there. Don't get me wrong. And I know the guys over in Wacken Germany will always do an unsigned band contest based on how many hits they get and how many times their songs are streamed or something, and they fly them over there. 19-year-olds standing in front of 80,000 fucking people. That's fucking just beautiful,
Yeah.
But I think it would be hard for us if we were one of those bands to be able to stand out amongst. How do you stand out amongst the crowd?
Yeah, no, I get that, and I think about that all the time. But I also think about that referring back to the days, the early days too, like whether it's the Beatles or you guys or anything like that, because they're, I don't want to say, I guess it was kind of like a keeper of the gate, the record labels, right? Like the record labels, most people wouldn't know anything about anything that wasn't either on the radio or, pressed on vinyl or something, or cassette tape or 8-track at those times. So I always wonder, what other bands were around when, the Beatles or you guys. Clearly there's a lot of bands that never even made it to the first, the second tier or the third step or the second step or anything like that. Where you say you guys were lucky, you early 80s, you're signed, you even got on major labels at some point. So I think about all the bands that never even had a shot, but may still have been good. You know what I mean? They may still have been good, but they just never reached that point. And I flash forward to now, those bands still compete, or not those bands, but new bands compete, like you said, on a battlefield that's just hundreds of thousands of songs, and it's how do you set yourself apart, which, again, luckily for you guys, you have the moniker and the career that comes along with all the new material, but it's got to be tough for a band that's just coming out, and it all lands on your shoulders, especially in the early days. You have to push that. You don't have the help of a promotional company, a label, or anything like that.
There was, I just a comment. I got to move on to another interview in a couple of minutes, but I just want to comment on something you said, and the difference is, when this shit happened for bands like us, it was the perfect fucking storm. That's what fucking happened. It was being created simultaneously around the world on different continents and on different coasts. It was a New York area, New Jersey thing, playing with New York punk and the new wave of British heavy metal, and there was the fucking West Coast guys in the Bay Area, and shit happening in Germany and the UK, blah, blah, blah. It's happening all over the fucking place. Well, the whole fucking musical landscape changes when Metallica releases Kill 'Em All. Right? The whole fucking thing changes, right there. It's like, holy shit, what the fuck is this? Didn't go to superstardom instantly. But those fucking guys, we're a Bay Area sound, we're this and that. Say whatever you want. They still had to travel 3,000 fucking miles to the East Coast, to New Jersey, to have Megaforce Records release that fucking record. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the perfect storm again, and the perfect people to fucking pick it up. All right? So they come to New Jersey to get this fucking record done. They're living with friends of mine out here. They're doing shows in the fucking basement. Well, in any case, I'll tell you about those managers I had back at Brooklyn. They did a show at the Paramount Theater, right? They brought over Venom. It was Venom's first fucking appearance. And it was like 1982 or 3 came over here. And John Zazula, who ran Megaforce Records, calls my manager of later on, George Parente, who owned L'Amour's, and says, I'm going to stop by the front of the Paramount. I'm going to blow the horn. You got to come out and hear what I have here, right? So Johnny pulls up in his fucking Jaguar, blows the horn. George comes out of the Paramount. They take a ride through Brooklyn, and John puts in No Life to Leather, the fucking demo. George goes, I heard it. He goes, but you haven't heard this. And he puts in the new tracks to Kill 'Em All, right? And George's mouth drops, right? Johnny's playing it out fucking 10. George's mouth drops. He loves telling the story. That's why I know it so well.
Yeah.
And John Zazula looks at him. God rest his soul. He's passed. He goes, they will be playing stadiums someday. Mark my fucking words.
Yeah.
That's why the whole thing worked, because people took that time to invest in it and to have the forethought to be able to look beyond what the moment was, but what the future could be.
That's very interesting. And that, I mean, I'm sure you have a plethora of those stories one day we'll hopefully be able to get at. But like you just said, I know you're a busy guy. You're on the media presser for the new album. So again, congratulations on Scorched and the long, long career. And hopefully you have many more, 21 more albums and another 40 years to go in Overkill. Yeah, you know.
But I got to tell you, man, this was my most enjoyable interview the whole time, because I love conversational stuff as opposed to yes, no, it took us 3 months. You know?
I get it.
Took me 6 takes.
Well, that's a great compliment from you, Bobby. I appreciate it, and for that, you know, you're more than welcome anytime to come on and we can have conversational talks, because I'm sure you have, like I said, a plethora of stories, and I'd love to get those out of your head and on the internet.
You ever get some free time? I mean, just get in touch with Kristen and do like a Saturday night together and have a few beers and a little bit of fun.
I will hold you to that, Bobby.
I'll do it. I'll do my ending then. My name is Bobby Blitz. I approve this fucking message.
Take it easy, man.
Good seeing you, bro. Thank you.
No problem.